Welcome to the Behind the Curtains podcast. I'm here with my good friend Ryan. We have been friends for as long as I can remember. I don't remember a time not knowing you. One of my favorite memories is that I had my own chocolate milk cup at your house that we would sit and sip together late at night while we watched
Oh,
our movies and stuff like that. And so, man, it's so good that after all this time, 30 years later, are you 30?
bro, next week.
Next week. That's why I thought you were a little bit behind me, not much, but yeah, man. So almost 30 years of knowing each other. And man, it's so cool to get to sit down and have this conversation that I think our lives have been so consumed with being pastors, being pastor kids, and all that comes with that some people know and some people don't, or some people assume things about. And so I'm just really excited to ask you some questions and see where this conversation goes. So the first question I want to ask, Ryan, is what would you say is the biggest assumption about you specifically as a pastor's kid?
So I think, it's funny because generally speaking, there's those general assumptions, right? That either they're just total rebels or they have all things together all the time or should, right?
Right.
And, I think so probably for me, um, I think it's that concept of just kind of always having it together, right? That everything is all the time. And I think those are the two extremes, that we see. But to your question, even just me specifically, I feel like it's, hey, oh, everything's always good. It's great. Everything always looks great.
Mm.
And there's no issues, right? He just like wakes up and loves the Lord. That's what he does all the
Yeah.
time.
His whole house is just filled with the incense of the Holy Spirit. And God is sitting in the living room watching TV with him and his family all the time.
Like he's a
You there? Sorry,
really
it's
strong.
you're lagging a little bit.
So yeah, I mean, I think,
That's awesome.
oh yeah, I'm
Yeah.
with
So
you.
we're just so everyone knows our Wi-Fi or something, we're lagging just a little bit. So we'll work with it and make it happen. But yeah, so that I feel that on a very real level, that there's this expectation to be the example of holiness or the example of Christ's likeness 24/7 as a pastor's kid and as a family where your dad is a senior pastor or lead pastor or a pastor in any form, youth pastor or whatever. There is that you can feel that weight of expectation. I've talked to pastor kids before that have told me, man, before, I don't think this was our story, but um, pastor kids would tell me, man, before I walked in the door to church, my dad or my mom would turn around and say, "You better put a smile on that face. Nobody can know that something's going wrong. We can't show that we're struggling right now. You
It's
better
so true.
fix that face." And man, I over
Uh,
the years, and you see these pastor kids and you wonder, why are they not in church? Why are they not in youth group? And it's like, for me specifically, it was like I felt like I couldn't be myself there because everybody expected me to be something that I didn't feel that I was.
yeah.
Um, and so moving on to the next question, what would you say you spent more time? Would you say you spent more time surrounded by people who love you or wanted things from you, or maybe a combination of both, and kind of explain that for your situation?
Yeah, I would say that it's been different seasons, and some of that I would even say goes to my own perception of those seasons, right? And so there were certainly times that you could get the sense, or I would perceive that um, would engage in relationship, engage in conversation, engage in whatever it may be in that moment, because of who my dad was or what he was doing, or even to some extent, like uh, what example I could give to someone else, even that concept of what we just talked about, like, hey, well, obviously they're the person you should hang out with because they're going to be good. There's nothing going to be wrong over there.
Right.
There was certainly seasons of that where whether or not someone really was, just trying to get something from me, or in that sense, I think I would have felt that. You
Mm,
know what I'm saying?
yeah.
And because I think to some extent, almost as a side note, I think we all struggle with that dilemma of having relationships with people where to some extent we kind of want to get something from them more than we want to give to them. I mean, I think that's a dilemma. Definitely, even connected to what we just talked about, there is that sense. But on another level, and I think you and I have been blessed in that way. There are countless of people who have sacrificially and graciously loved me, loved my family, and of course, to some extent, you have that on a broad scale, but you also have that on a very intimate scale, and that is something that I think, especially as I've gotten older, I sense that more. I sense the a whole lot more now that I'm older than certainly I did as a teenager who was, bucking the system where I could, or whatever it may be. So I think it's kind of like that. It's almost those seasons and my own perception.
Yeah. And then I think this is a good point. I was going to say this at the beginning, but I think this is even a better place to say this. I think some people might be expecting us to, slap some hands in this conversation, and maybe get a little vicious and attack certain situations that people are aware that our families have walked through. And that's not the intention of this at all. In fact, we want to do the opposite of that and show that even though there is some downsides to being a pastor's kid and some things that you have to walk through that are hard, there are really good people that you get to do life with, and that's one thing I'd say about your family, Ryan, is that, man, even from just you see it online, you just know it about the Forsons, that y'all do life really well with people. You have people that they're constantly in your all's homes, you're doing life together, and that's such a beautiful picture of what the church should be. And the things that our families have walked through, that we've walked through, even in our own lives as kids and adults, we could easily go, man, I don't want anything to do with anybody. Like,
Yeah.
I don't want people in my home. I'm not going to let my guard down. I'm not going to trust anybody. But instead, we choose to believe that, man, there are good people, and there's people that aren't just out to get from us, but they truly care about us. They love us. They show us that. Maybe sometimes it's a little forceful, but they show us that love. And it's there's it's kind of the same for any situation. There's the bad, and then there's the really, really good too.
Yeah.
And so if you were hoping to get a me and Ryan going, off on people podcast this week, just go ahead and listen to Justin Bieber's new album or something. I don't know. Just find something else to do. But um, all right. So moving on.
Exactly.
Now that I've plugged Justin Bieber, uh, how do you or how have
Someone has
you do what?
someone has to.
Someone has to. We have to. You have to talk about Justin, right? So, how do you or how have you handled living under a microscope? So, for what I mean by this, and just to clarify for people that are listening, um, what people don't realize is that pressure of, and we've hit on it already, that people are watching you and they have expectations of you, and they're waiting to see how are you going to respond, what are you going to do with this information. There's all these situations within the church, unfortunately, sometimes where you're, even as a kid, or under a microscope, and they're watching you to see how you act. and they're judging your character even at a young age. And so how have you kind of walked that out personally, um, knowing that in certain seasons you're being kind of hovered over?
Yeah, because to me, it's so much. I think you and I had talked about it. It's like that fishbowl concept, and like everyone kind of looking in, and or at least that feeling, and I think one just kind of a silly example. I mean, I think part of for me to your question, how have I handled it, or how do I? I mean, part of that is just even just the example of my own parents. As somebody who, people certainly are paying attention, and as we were growing up, paying attention to, what kind, how does he talk, how does he respond, what are, if anything, what is he laughing at, what is he not laughing at, all those things. And
Mhm.
I laugh because like in sports, especially as like some of my siblings were getting into high school sports, dad sometimes is like, we can remember it out, like, boy, gotta get out because, he was so passionate at these games, right?
Your dad
And so,
was? So
yeah,
it skipped a little bit, so I wanna make sure we got this. Your dad's passionate, and you're saying like, "Oh, dad, like, chill, bro."
yeah, dads be passionate, and everyone's like, ooh, local pastor, and that boy getting kicked out, and like, I'm like, ooh, got him, I mean, just stirring it up. But honestly, that example of like, hey, like we're still normal. Like no one, let's
Right.
not normal, but of course he specifically always would always remind us in every situation, hey, what you do does matter. And people are paying attention, and whether we like that or not, you know, I believe, as just as believers in general, that's something that we should take into account, and we should acknowledge that there is value, and the Lord uses our lives in that manner where, and I think even Paul instructing in different places, like, carry yourself in certain environments, people are going to pay attention. So I mean, I think in a lot of ways that is the positive side of that, and how I have been able to view that in a different sense. But of course there's been times like you've already mentioned where it's almost like, hey, there's so much care and so much attention that, sometimes you're like, how do I even just escape, just to take a breath, just to like
Mhm.
go and just, I think that's part of the journey. And I think for me, just kind of being reminded that at the end of the day, there's people that just care and they want the best. And I was even reminding my mom the other day, like, hey, people just care. And that is a blessing. And of course, at times it may feel crazy and like, how do I even respond to all the caring, but that's a blessing in so many ways. And just also see the best in people's intentions,
Right,
and like you said earlier, not assuming the worst, which can
right.
be a challenge, if you've, especially as a pastor's kid or anyone in ministry for that matter, you know.
Yeah, I was talking to a pastor friend of mine this week, and I was talking to him about how I feel like assumptions are a huge way that Satan gets his foot in the door with church members and pastors and pastor staffs and just the church in general. If we assume the worst of people, we'll see the worst in people. And
Mhm.
and this microscope that we're under, it's not necessarily people have us under a microscope because they wish us harm or they have evil intent or anything like that, but they care. And sometimes they don't realize, maybe the effect that that has on us as kids, where we feel like we're being watched and every move we're making is being plugged in. But it's so cool that you mentioned your dad, getting a little cray at the volleyball games and all that kind of stuff. But what's cool about that is, man, yes, he's Donnie Forson. He's a pastor. We know him as a pastor, but he's also a dad,
Yeah.
and he's also a sports dad.
Yeah.
And if in all reality, he's a dad before he's ever a pastor, right? And so it's I mean, not that he doesn't
Yeah.
pastor his family and all that stuff, but the title father to him, I would imagine, means a lot more than when people say Pastor Donnie. I would imagine that he's moved more by when his kids or his grandkids call him. What do they call him? What are your
Oh, Papa D.
Papa D? I'm sure that carries so much more weight with
Yeah.
him than Pastor Donnie. You know what I mean? And so that's who he is first. And he's a proud dad, and he gets passionate about what his kids are doing. And he's not afraid to be
Yeah.
that. And I think it can be easy as a pastor's kid or a pastor, um, to retract from those moments and not just enjoy it and be passionate about it, because what are people going to think?
Yeah.
The
Right.
reality is, who cares? If they truly know your heart and they know you, who cares what they think? But that's easier said than done, right?
Well, that's exactly. Is that not the challenge? I mean, really, it's even more so now than even when you and I were younger. Now, everyone, especially in the social media age, the challenge for pastors is popularity. And whether we like it or not, or whether anyone says that's important or not important, of course it comes through people's minds. And you're faced with constant, comparison, or how are you measuring up to the next guy who's killing it, at this church or whatever,
Mhm.
filters through every part of your life. And if you can't find a way to come out from under that microscope, like you're saying, and even just in your own self mentally, if you can't come out of living for what everyone else may be thinking
Yeah.
in every part of your life, then it's going to be hard. I mean, I think dad, I told him the other day, when he wasn't able to preach the other day. There was someone else was been walking through that journey of like not being able to do what he normally does, right?
Right.
Normally preach, and just reminding him like, hey, before that, before you're a preacher, before you and I are preachers' kids, we are sons and daughters of our Father in heaven, and that is first and foremost our identity.
Yeah.
And that is a huge piece of the equation that I think we can forget, especially when we place
You said it cut out there at the very end. You said, especially when we place what?
those assumptions, like what we've been talking about, when we place assumptions or even just place emphasis on someone's role or placement, in ministry or as a family member.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so good, man. So what do you wish people knew who have never been in your shoes? For someone who's never been a part of a family where their dad is a pastor, or not, maybe not just a senior pastor, but they've just never been in a family where ministry was what brought the money in the home. Ministry is what you grew up with your dad doing, or anything like that. What do you wish people knew, um, that have never walked a day in your shoes?
I think of a couple of things. I mean, one, we're joking, just you could always say, well, I mean, the money isn't always great, right? Anyone could always, there's even that. For me, it would be two things. It would be one, that true ministry, not just pastorship, but true ministry just really doesn't end. It's a 24/7 gig. That is something, think of so many people that are like, oh my gosh, I have to go to church just once a week.
Yeah.
Ministry, and especially, you know, when someone's living out that role, in the way Scott has called them, it is a five. I mean, it is a lifestyle in so many ways, and there's a balance that's at play. That is an important balance that I think many pastors, even myself, I'm sure you've experienced it in these ways, like learning that balance and learning that you have to build time for your family, you have to build time for your kids, you have to build those moments. So I think that on one sense is just like, hey, you know church being only an activity you go to at certain times. For us, it was always watching my dad, and I think it's been a blessing, to be honest, but watching my dad meet people in their time of need, and that extended far beyond the quote unquote work hours, right?
Right.
um
Yeah, it's not a 9 to 5.
no, not 9 to 5 at all. And I think the other thing, which I was just really thinking on, I mean, I think preaching, and they've got all these different, oh, he wasn't as passionate, or he wasn't, he really could have done a better analogy or whatever. As a pastor's kid, the biggest challenge is sometimes like, I know I do life with my dad,
Yeah.
and then he preaches, and having to walk the journey of knowing I can't hold, because he teaches me or others what God calls us to. Meaning, my dad's going to preach about things that he himself struggles with, that he himself has not perfected, right? I mean, and learning how to sit and listen and learn, and not place those same expectations that I think generally can happen in the church setting, where people listen to the pastor area. Well, sometimes I was the worst. Dad and I could fight. I mean, I would make it challenging. And so sometimes to then go to church and listen as he would teach on something that I'm like, oh, in that moment, I'm going to say, I don't think you're very good at that. And working through that is hard to really explain to someone else, and
Right.
even just give perspective of how that really different ways.
Yeah. I mean, I think, it's we got lucky in the sense that, um, you know, the men that we see pastoring, um, are men that are the same on stage as they are off
Yep.
stage.
Right.
And not every pastor kid has that, unfortunately. There's some that are out there whose dad is more of a performer on stage, and then he comes home and he's checked out, he's not present, he's not doing life with his kids. His life is the church, and that's where he spends his time. And it's almost like, uh daddy's going to his mistress
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
situation for some pastor kids.
Right.
And it's, I thank God, for the things that I've seen, the good, bad, and the ugly, and that I've gotten to watch, the men in my life who pastor walk some difficult things out in integrity, and in some situations they didn't handle it right, and I've seen them own up to it over
Yeah.
time. And it's a beautiful thing that we get to see. um, and I think it's good for people to know that it's important, for a pastor kid. If there's a pastor listening to this right now and you feel like, man, I'm that dad who's checking out on my kids, and I'm more about my ministry at the church than I am at my ministry at home, man, get that right before you start worrying about the office and the the church, because that's your first ministry. And
Yeah.
what a blessing it is that, like you're saying, you've gotten to have that with your dad. You do life with him. And we were talking the other day about, in y'all situation that you're walking through right now, the conversations that you've been having with your dad and just being open and honest, and this is not fun, this is but here's some things we got to look at, and that's beautiful, and that he welcomes that from you. He's a man of honor. And yeah, so I'm gonna get emotional, but it's okay. I'm all right. We're good, right? No,
Yeah.
I do. I love Donnie Forson for sure. Um, so next question: has being a pastor's kid ever made you want to skip church because you felt like you couldn't be yourself? Maybe not just because you wanted to stay home and play games or play with your dog or literally do anything else, but have you ever felt like, as a pastor's kid, maybe during some seasons in the church where there was pressure or there was some division or um, whatever the situation may be, did you ever feel as a kid like, man, I just really I don't want to go and be around that? Or
Yeah.
did you feel the opposite of that, like, bring it on, let somebody say something?
Yeah. Right. My first thought, my first thought was, well, not even being a pastor's kid. Of course, there's days we all want to skip church. That's like, and if you don't admit that, then you lying, and the Lord got to come and deal with that because
Repent and
yeah,
turn.
because of course we feel that. But honestly, for me, I would say out of my siblings, I definitely um, in most seasons, like, let's go. Like, I'm going, and I'm going to be there. And, it may not be what I want to do, but I'm going to be there. And if there's a conversation, I mean, of course, that's been my downfall in ways. And it's also been the ways that I believe the Lord has, gifted me. But like, I am like, let's go. I want to be there. And so for me, I have not necessarily felt um, like, oh, I shouldn't be myself. That's definitely been the case. But I think, just on some of my siblings, it was different. It was more like, I don't even want to be present. I do not want to go. I don't want to deal with it, especially when, like you said, there's drama or challenge, which is going to be over the course of ministry. There's
Right.
going to be times that's um, a reality for a pastor's kid that is different, you know, um,
Yeah.
than there. Yeah, I mean, I hope that kind of answers it. But
Yeah.
I think in so many ways, there's different personalities that kind of play into that. But for me, it was definitely like my biggest issue was be careful and don't do something you shouldn't do.
Right.
you know?
Don't let your mouth get ahead of your mind, your heart. Like, don't just, out of the abundance of the heart the mouth speaks, right? And so sometimes that heart is deceitful above all things, and it wants to say something that doesn't need to be said. And yeah, it could
Yes.
get you in trouble sometimes.
100%. And if anything, over the years, that's what my dad has consistently. I would have no problem acknowledging, even to this day, that he has taught me, and I mean, painfully over the years. I'm sure it's just worn him smooth out. To walk with me, picking, and what things are um, worth pursuing, and what things are really moments for us to say, hey, the Lord is in control, and I just don't have to fight every single battle that presents itself or that is being conjured up. And so
Yeah.
I think he's been such an example of that for
Mhm.
our family, even when that was hard for him. And so I think I'm thankful for those moments. I think it's helped me in so many ways be just even the husband and father and even friend that I would be now.
Yeah. I I remember my grandpa telling me one time when we were walking through some stuff, and I was, I'm a lot like you. Like we have the big brother syndrome where it's like we're ready to go to war and we're ready to protect our siblings and we're ready to protect our family.
Yeah.
And my grandpa told me, he said, Randall, there's only so many hills you can die on. And what he
Mm,
meant by that was there's only so many things you can be so passionate about that you want to act on,
yeah.
and so many battles that you can fight before you have all these battles and no strength to do anything
Yeah.
about them. And I think that's what you're talking about is kind of having moments where we have to pick our words, and we have to pick the moments where we step in or when we step back. And when being a protector is a good thing, but also being a protector can go too far sometimes. But
Yeah.
um, we love our families, and it's no one likes to see the people they love get taken advantage of or go through criticism or hard
Yeah.
times. And um, yeah, so what would you say is the best thing about being a pastor's kid?
I would say, um, for me in our particular situation, because I think, like you and I have discussed, I know I can think of many who do not have the same experience. But for me, I think the best part is me being able to watch day in and day out. My mom loved people and do so in a manner that, of course, there's failings and there's we should have done it like this, we should have, but this constant just reminder of who Christ is by way of um, how my parents have functioned, and doing that as a pastor's kid. Again, you're Sunday concept just every day. And so I really do, to some extent. I mean, I think that's one of the best things that I feel like I've experienced thus far, is just being able to kind of have that front row seat, to watch the Lord's working in their life and watch the ways that even through, chaos, pain, um, the Lord can be made much of, and just love that other people, would put on display in those moments, and put on display. I can't even. I mean, I switched to the dentist my dad has gone to for years, and every time I go to the dentist, all they talk about is the shoes that I would have to fill. And, in some sense, you're like, oh, he is fine. You don't be quiet. Yes, he's normal. Be quiet. But in some sense, it's just a reminder to me, of the way my dad has chosen to live his life and who he seeks to be most like. And so that journey, I think, for me, I would say is the best part. I mean, I just wouldn't trade that.
That's
You know,
awesome, man. That's awesome. What would be the hardest thing? What's the hardest thing about being a
I
pastor?
would say the hardest thing to, what'd you say?
It's it's lagging every now and then, but you're good. Go ahead. You can answer.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I would just say the hardest thing is that battle internally, when it comes to, um, you know, almost the opposite of what I was just talking about, because it is a more daily living out of quote unquote church life. Um, as a kid and as growing up, separating and being able to understand, you know, these concepts that, like, for example, the pressure that we could feel inadvertently or without anyone's intention of that, but
Mm.
feeling like, oh my gosh, I have to be perfect, or oh my gosh, I mean, like, my dad reads through the Bible, multiple times in a year.
Yeah.
Do that, or he falls asleep praying all the time. I have to do that, or like,
Mm.
it's just like, that pressure that I think is not because, and I'm thankful it's not because my dad or mom ever place that pressure on us,
Yeah.
but it is just natural. And like you said, I know of other people that to this day are still struggling with the concept of legalism and feeling like they have to follow all these rules. And some of that was because of how their parents functioned, but I think that is the hardest thing. It's learning how to separate, learning how to not allow your faith to be built solely on your parents, but allowing your faith to be developed at your own relationship with who Christ is, your own experience of who Christ is. And sure, my dad has done things that hopefully I can do myself, and just how I care for other people, but Jesus, Christ himself, so learning how to put my faith, trust, hope, and set my attention on Christ versus the experiences, or, the check offs of things that we may do, I think has definitely been one of the hardest.
Yeah. That's awesome. Well, I can say, Ryan, just from watching your life, um, I've always seen you as somebody who loves well. And you have, from back in the restored conference days, man, your heart to see people
Mhm.
saved. And I've seen you in platforms, and I've seen you face to face with people, and man, you're passionate about people knowing Jesus, and you're passionate about people pursuing the Lord, truly pursuing the Lord. And man, um, I think that that comes out of a place where you've gone past the legalistic stuff, and it's like it's just Jesus,
Mhm.
and I've seen that in your life. And
Mhm.
man, I've been there too, where it's like, for me, I rebelled. Like I went the complete like everything that I thought was like church or God or Bible, I was like, I'm gonna do the opposite of that, and I'm gonna go this other direction. And I cut off you. I cut off all these other people in my life that were positive influences to go chase the world for a little bit. And it was because of seeing men like you and other people in my life, younger and older, that I started going, man, I walked away from something to try and find life, and all I found was death and disappointment. And
Yeah.
I left what was really life-giving. And I let people um form my idea of who God is. And
Yeah.
that was one of the biggest hurts and things that I think I've ever walked through. And like we've talked about earlier, it can be easy to just throw in the towel and say, man, people are messed up, and I want nothing to do with them, and I don't want to be a pastor, and I don't want to be in ministry. But I think it says something about our family, and what the Lord can do in our lives, that we've walked through the things we've walked through, the criticisms and the insecurities and all of that. And both of us are in ministry today,
Yeah.
going into our 30s, or, me being in my 30s. we're we're in it, and we're loving people in spite of what we've seen happen. We didn't, and that's Jesus. He
Yeah.
redeemed those places in us, the legalistic places and the fearful places. He redeems all those things.
Well, I think that's exactly, I mean, and I know you and I have talked about this. I mean, coming out of that and working through that, and you and I, and we other, and regardless of what it looked like to anyone else, the reality was we were both trying to figure out who is Jesus to us.
Right.
Who, like, what do we think? What do we believe? Not what everyone else would say. Hey, do this, do that, don't do this, don't do that. I mean, and I think the other piece to that, like you mentioned, is learning. And because really, when you understand that, when you see who Christ is, when you understand what he's done for you, now when you look at the the hurt and the pain that can happen amongst believers,
Yeah.
what happens then is, instead of getting mad, being like, I can't ever, look at that person again, why would they ever do that, da 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 da, all these things, now it all makes sense. Sin does a number. I mean, it will do a horrific work in believers and non. I mean, it will just. And when we know, and when we've experienced it ourselves, that hey, we ourselves did that. We ourselves were so destructive in our sinful nature, and yet Christ would love us and pursue us and want nothing but full on relationship with us. To me, that has pulled me out of those hard moments and
Absolutely.
helped me view people as the same as I was before Christ. I am before Christ right now. I'm sinful. I'm in desperate need of a Savior, right? And thankfully, Christ is present and ready and willing to receive me in those worst of moments. And so now I feel like my perception and the way I would view other people has changed. And I think our lives, our conversations, even over the years, I mean, Christ's work in our hearts is what brings us out of that. That's just, I don't know how else somebody does it.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I don't either. So I want to ask you this final question. I know we have some other questions there, but I feel like we've already kind of touched on that, the other ones that are listed. But um, I want to ask you this, and uh, if you had an audience of all pastor kids sitting in front of you right now, and I gave you 1 minute to tell them something, uh, I know it seems kind of bossy, but if I gave you 1 minute, said Ryan, don't take a minute and 30 seconds, take a minute. What would you say? And this was your one shot to talk to this group of these pastor kids. What would you say to them?
Yeah. I think I would 100% say, fix your eyes on Jesus. Fix your eyes on Jesus. I mean, and I say that because it would be so easy to fix our eyes either on the best of our parents, the best of our pastor that we're watching, or the worst of them, and allow that to impact our relationship, impact how we would treat other people. And I would say neither of those can be the foundation of how we function in our walk with the Lord and how we respond to what he's called us to. So I think fixing our eyes on Jesus and who he is and what he's done on our behalf and what he's promised to do in the future, how he views us, what he's done in our life, I think that alone is so freeing versus my mom. I watched her in the church, and oh man, it was horrible. It was horrible. I never want to do anything with church, or the opposite. Oh, they're on this pedestal. I, I think at the end of the day, my plea would be, fix your eyes on Jesus and see who he is, know who he is, and just seek to be like him, and then enjoy the journey and hug your mom and dad, because they are far more than just, the Lord is using them in your life.
Yeah, that's beautiful, man. I love that, and I love you, and I love your family, and man, I just want to thank you for taking the time to come and hang out and you know deal with some not so great Wi-Fi that kept making us skip around. But I think everybody will hear enough to know our heart for other pastor kids out there, and our heart from us, that people know we've walked through some difficult situations, and yet we still love people, and we still love the Lord,
Mhm,
and
mhm.
we love those who even maybe have done us wrong in the past. And you don't get to a place where you can be in ministry and function healthy unless you do that, unless you lay down those hurts and wounds. And it doesn't mean that we want to go get a hamburger and french fries and a drink with them necessarily, you know what I mean? But if we see them there, hopefully
Yep, yep,
there's no more resentment. We've walked that out, and we've let those things go. And like you
yep,
said, we're beholding Jesus. That's
yep,
the ultimate. That's the key, right? Is
yep,
Jesus is the center of everything.
yep,
And in that, that's where the healing comes. That's where the strength to keep moving forward comes. That's where the pause or mute button on our mouths come when we want to speak up and let our minds be heard. Because if we're honest, there are those moments where we would just like to give so and so a piece of our mind, and instead God says, how about you just hand this situation over to me? That peace that you want to release, how about you let me just give you my peace
yep,
and calm down?
yep.
And I've seen it over and over and over again. And so it's beautiful, man. So yeah, dude. Again, thank you so much for coming, and I pray that this is a blessing to those who listen. I know they'll be blessed by your words. I know I was, and I look forward to doing this again, maybe on some different topics. We can get together and talk, and people seem to be interested in what you have to say, my friend.
Yeah.
And
They're just trying to see if I'll say something crazy.
yeah, they're just, what's he gonna say? He's gonna get on there and start acting ghetto, or what's he gonna do? And
Oh,
no,
man.
man.
Hey, love you tons, Randall. Love your family so much. You know it. And it's been, as I look to, I wouldn't change it. I'm thankful for the journey that we've been on, and I'm thankful, even just as I reflect on Dad's journey recently, on the ways people have loved him so so well.
Yeah,
And that's an encouraging piece to all of us, of course. And but at the end of the day, I'm thankful that you invited me. Thankful that we got to talk, and again, just love you tons. Thankful for you.
yeah, man. Well, that's the end of this podcast. I hope you guys enjoyed it. We'll see you next week.